You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games,
physical basketball
and I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched it on YouTube.
Anyway,
I saw the games. I watched the games.
Well, we're here. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 27, NCAA Tournament Preview, the surprising and not so surprising events in 2025, recorded on the morning of Monday, March 17th, 2025. So, Bob, happy Bracket Monday / St. Patrick's Day.
You know, we like to talk about this being Christmas in March, and I think right now we're like sitting on Christmas Eve, and it's just so exciting. I'm not really wearing green, at this point, but I'm telling you, I'm just ecstatic over the fact that we're finally at the point where we can kind of look back on the year and also maybe grab a green beer at one of the at your local establishment of your choosing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like St. Patrick's Day. Golf season's just right around the corner for me. I know you're about ready to go into sports hibernation for about 6 months, right?
That's right. Yes.
St. Patrick's Day. Yeah.
Yeah. Right after One Shining Moment plays, I go into sports hibernation. So.
Yeah. So at this point, we're ready. Yeah. But yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you too, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, yesterday we're trying to talk more specifically about IU when it's all said and done, but just to kind of update everybody who might be somewhat interested in where we are right now with the process. We went through senior day. We went through the Big Ten tournament since our last episode. And Mike Woodson has, I think it's safe to say he's coached his last game at Indiana as of last Thursday.
Yep. Yeah. Well, obviously we knew go back February 7th that this was coming. So it's
we weren't expect. Yeah, we knew we were expecting this to end. It was just, I think we were kind of, I think even as I think on February 7th, we figured it would end around this time. And then they had a bit of life towards the end, but which is interesting that they actually kind of, almost pulled out a berth. I mean, they were the last team on the bubble, right? They were the first team out. Was basically how it was looked.
Yeah, according to, I guess, what came out of the committee. So, I guess they were the last one out. Did you think it was? Did you really follow that whole controversy that was going on?
It's really funny because you follow IndyCar for a while, and really the only thing comparable to the NCAA tournament is the qualification process for Indianapolis 500.
Mm-hmm.
And so controversy is usually a matter of, everyone's always interested in the front row, the front two rows, and then that number 33 car, the last car in the field and there's drama. If you've ever watched qualifications, and where you have a bump day drama, or like a decade ago, John Andretti, I think it was with the gun going off and his car didn't have the speed, and all of a sudden he found just enough speed to bump some guy. I think it was bump a guy off the back. And it's the same thing with this. And so controversy to me is like, okay, I can make a case for either team, but at the end of the day, I think that what really pushed it, you look at the records, 22 wins for Carolina, 19 for Indiana. But what about the quad ones? They only had one quad win versus what 3 or 4 for Indiana.
Right.
All of that kind of factors in. But the big kicker for me was at the end is that you look at the pre-conference schedules and how their teams performed.
Right.
And when you're on that much of a razor wire, it makes sense as to why Indiana didn't get the nod and Carolina did.
Yeah.
I will say this though. They are blue bloods. We have proven that time and time again on this show and in our conversations that we may be Rockefellers without a whole lot of money right now, well, we have money. Maybe without the career performances.
Yeah.
Maybe we may be laying a little dormant in activity. But when you say Carolina, Indiana were fighting for the last spot in the NCAA tournament, it's almost like saying AJ Foyt and Rick Mears were going at it in the 80s for number 33 in the field.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, it seems almost out of place, given their at least their relative historical stature. Yeah, for me, like that's the basketball side of it, and obviously, everyone seems to be having fun talking about. I guess there's the compensation package of the AD of actually getting some kind of bonus if Carolina makes it. My favorite part about it was just the fact that you have to admit it seems like the March Madness scriptwriters really outdid themselves with the central villain in this bracketology drama being a UNC athletic director named Bubba. Absolutely stuck the landing on that character. The name is absolutely what you would want in that drama.
Smokey and the Bandit 4.
Precisely. Couldn't have asked for a better name for a character in this melodrama.
Oh man, and so I mean I think at this point you have to, it's like you have to laugh and you have to kind of just chuckle at it. To me, I was actually interested, when I heard IU wasn't going to play in the Crown for college basketball. I mean that and I think part of it for me is almost like I get why you don't, but I also get why you might. And in this era, the question becomes, why would you not put yourself in a position to try at least something to get you a little more notoriety, even though you got a bunch of kids who are going to be portaling soon, even though you're going through a coaching search, all of this. There is that thing where, maybe if you're a kid that's going in the portal and you play extremely well in this Crown, that might actually help you, I would think, especially if your season wasn't exactly great.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, it depends upon how hard the teams, I guess, are trying to win the whole thing. It does just become like an exhibition for those kids to try to, raise their stock versus like, okay, we're trying to like actually, get to the finals and win the whole thing. So yeah, that's a good question. And just so much with college football and basketball now with these, with kids sort of like pulling themselves out of competition if they're not going for the championship, seems to become such a trend now. You almost just kind of assume like, all right, some of these teams are just going to be completely gutted by kids saying, I'm not playing. I'm focusing on the portal or the draft or whatever's next for my future.
If you think I'm going to rupture my Achilles or blow my ACL for the weed eater college Crown game in Las Vegas playing South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
South Carolina. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. But I was trying to think of like or Miami, we're going to play and we're going to talk about them later, is awful.
Yeah.
But, you look at a lot of the awful and it's like, I don't know, you're right. This thing does kind of have this feel of like, this could really turn into a just really bad, really bad basketball.
Yeah. Galen and Scott were talking about that last night. They had a really good pod, about everything. Yeah. But I know one thing they mentioned was, I think Galen was going through the list of teams that were participating in both what were projected for the NIT and for the Crown game. And it looked pretty thin in terms of quality, like Power 5 teams.
And I could live in a world where the NIT becomes almost like a high, mid-major, low-major sort of consolation prize.
Right.
Which I think if the Crown does anything, if it just gets a bunch of mediocre, Big Ten team or Big Ten and Big 12 teams out of contention for the NIT, and just let the Indiana States and St. Louis, even to a certain degree, like Atlantic 10 type teams who are kind of in there. If you just let those guys kind of go at it and just have something, because I think it might mean something to those fan bases, to at least have additional basketball later in the season.
Yeah.
Whereas like the power teams are like, why are we even here? Why are we doing this?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, well, anyway, real quick on the coaching search. Any thoughts at this point where we are?
My take. I mean, it's we knew it was going to be about 6 weeks from beginning to end. Starting back literally like the beginning of February, and I think the combination of an athletic director that seems to have things really locked down in terms of leaks and information, like that is not allowing any, plus an IU like media sphere that just is absolutely dying for information. And then on top of that, 6 weeks of all that going together is creating this strange, weird vacuum where people are just trying to search for any scraps that they can find. They're sort of blowing in the wind right now, or as we were saying before, scratches on the Schrodinger's cat, box, as it were. I don't have a lot of opinions right now because, again, I think whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'm more interested in finding out, like, hey, who's it going to be once it happens, and then kind of diving into that, like, okay, well, where's this guy in terms of recruiting and their, what his style is and all that kind of stuff. Well, and obviously we'll have a pod about that at some point. The one thing I would say is that, and it's funny, and you've seen this too, Bob, fans wanting two things. They want a quick decision, and they want a big hire to happen. And I'm trying to kind of let people know, just historically, that's not exactly how it typically works. Like, if you're an IU fan, you're wanting to land like a big fish in this coaching market, really you don't want the hire to happen very soon, because historically most of the big whale hires in the past happen typically in like later March and actually into April. Whereas usually the coaches that are hired, let's say like in mid-March, those are the guys that are usually being promoted from lower tiers up to the Power Five school. Like Otzelberger, when he went to Iowa State, that was March 18th. Todd Golden was a March 18th hire. Underwood was March 18th at Illinois. But so those are guys like moving up. Then you look at like Roy Williams, we went to UNC, that was like April 14th. Ben Howland, April 3rd, we went to UCLA. Tommy Lloyd, April 15th. Mark Pope, April 12th. Calipari going to Arkansas, April 10th. Musselman going to USC, April 4th. So you just see, like, it's not perfect. Obviously, some whales get hired kind of early and some promotions happen later. But just as a tendency, I'm trying to get some folks to understand, like, yeah, if you really want the big hire, you're probably going to have to wait a little bit.
And patience is patience is a virtue right now for a lot of reasons, because I think on the other side of the patience is, and I mentioned this last night, like, I'm going to use it again, one of my favorite phrases. Thank you to a good friend of mine, Aaron Carr, for introducing to me years ago, a stinking pile of. And right now, like, when you look at a coaching list, it's a stinking pile of above average with everyone with questions. Maybe, and we're talking about feasible coaches. Take Brad Stevens off the list. Brad's off the list, and even then, there would still be questions. As with anybody, because he's coming back in the college game after 10 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But even Scott Drew, even that caliber of candidate, or Rick Pitino, because of his age, there would be a question. Maybe they're far and above beyond better than other guys, but there's, for the most part, when you look at any sort of list of college basketball coaches, you have guys who are showing success, but we don't know if they can get through a regression or not. You have guys who are, clearly, 600, 65, 70% winning percentages, but we're not really sure that they can continue to do that over the course of, you're not really sure they can do that, and win a national championship. There's a lot of guys that are still unproven. And I go back to be patient, chill out a little bit. It's going to pass. We're going to, when you find the guy, I'm going to probably take 48 hours to really think about this before I say irrational exuberance or irrational anger, as to say why this is the case. Because again, and we're going to talk about these guys a little later, when you look at Michigan, when you look at Kentucky, when you look at Louisville, all three of those programs had significant fan opposition to their hires a year ago or so at this time.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of worked out for them, all three, at least in the short term.
Right.
In the short term.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency towards all or nothing thinking in these coaching hires. Like every coach is either a 100% failure or going to fail or 100% success. That means they're going to succeed. And it's all really just incremental probabilities. I mean, there are coaches, I think we can reasonably say, have a higher probability of succeeding than others based upon their resume and comparing their resume against, trends in the past in college basketball. But you're right. It's just, it gets kind of silly when fans are getting a little bit too over their skis about like, oh my God, if we hire this guy, it's over. Or if we hire this guy, everything is going to, become the sunny uplands of history for IU basketball.
And we don't have cloning technology to clone Nate Oates yet, do we?
No, and yeah, we don't have that yet, but I'm sure AI is working on that.
I'm sure there's a lab in Alabama that's looking to suppress the technology. They're actually going to get it and hold it themselves and hold it for proprietary purposes.
Exactly.
So speaking of proprietary purposes, I sent it over to you, and I had you Home Field Apparel, our title sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
I would just encourage everybody, if you haven't seen the ad yet, it's actually the online ad that they're running, and I'm not sure. I think they'll be running on some of the game stuff.
Yeah.
It's actually really, really funny, really, really witty. It was one of those things where it's like, I'm proud to have Home Field at the bottom of this that we're looking at right now, because it was just, the infomercial was just, it really kind of speaks to me as someone who in his late teens was watching infomercials on late night television for entertainment value.
It had a bit of a Billy Mays kind of quality to it, right?
Totally. It was, yeah. And the fact he had Grandpa sitting in the recliner, it's like, I know that guy. I think I'm related to him. Yeah. It's like, or maybe that's me. I'm not sure, but
no, it was pretty well done, and I'm glad to see that they're starting to put out some ads on TV, especially at a national level. And of course, with it being March, is the perfect time to be pushing that stuff out there.
So if you want to emotionally connect with your father for the first time in decades, which is the tagline from the show, I go to www.homefieldapparel.com and to check out what they have, and maybe look to get your favorite team that you think is going to make it in the Final Four, and get your shirt, or hat or other apparel. So
great. And coming up next, we'll jump in on our 2025 retrospective and discuss the not so surprising events of the season. Next on X's and Joe's.
And welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Bob Moats with my good friend Mike Wiemuth. And here's kind of the thing that when we kind of talk about the season in review, I'm kind of the opinion that I look at the end of the regular season, because the tournament's just so bonkers. I think when we usually talk about who's doing really well, obviously winning the national championship or making a Final Four or Sweet 16 is a significant accomplishment. But it's actually the whole thing. But a lot of what I think as we look at evaluation as to what to build to is to give yourself the best chances to do that. And that is your regular season performance and your conference tournament performance to actually get yourself into correct seeding. Mm-hmm. Making the tournament versus making the tournament, like we talked about earlier with IU versus Carolina. What's the expectation there? The expectation is that you're not fighting it out just to make a tournament in some programs. Other programs, making a tournament is historic. So there's various different bars that programs are looking at clearing. So I think at this point in the season, we at least have an evaluation where you can say, okay, so who did it work for? Who did it didn't? And did it surprise us in many respects? Yeah. And also we can start looking at, okay, what are the questions we're looking at as we move forward into the off season and going into next year? What are maybe some overall bigger picture ideas that maybe some things that we kind of expected to see and some things that kind of caught us off guard a bit? And I kind of just like to start us off on, I think when conference consolidation happened, we're talking big picture here a minute. I think we figured that there were going to be two super conferences because of football, the SEC and the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. There'd be kind of a next level of the Big 12, the ACC, And in basketball, the Big East, because they're primarily a power basketball conference. There were some questions around, well, would the Mountain West continue? How would the Mountain West look?
Yeah.
And then basically everybody else. And kind of looking at this from the fact of, did this play out a certain way? And I think yesterday, all but 2 teams in the Southeastern Conference made the NCAA tournament.
That's impressive.
Shattering a record.
Yeah.
Now, so for all the complaining that those people did down south about the football stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, this is, I'm not hearing a peep out of them about this. About, that
maybe this is compensation.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it makeup.
Maybe it is, and maybe there's a conspiracy here where they're trying to get them to buy more into basketball, so that way they can kind of even out the fan bases. And Thursday I'm going to be down in Lexington, at least watching the first couple games. It's going to be interesting to see Louisville in Rep Arena, by the way.
Oh yeah, that'll be interesting.
Louisville for Creighton, as I said, let it rain. But when you look at the Southeastern Conference for a moment, and you look at, and also I forgot the ACC in that kind of that next level. Like, will the ACC, what's actually happened here was the Southeastern Conference really kind of propelled. The Big Ten got, I think, a healthy number of 7 in, I believe.
Yeah.
So, but that's and the Big 12 was still a very top heavy, still really still again very similar number to the Big Ten still. So they're still, I think overall, at least in the top end, the second best conference. But I think this conference thing kind of didn't really surprise us looking at it, knowing that the Southeastern Conference was going to be incredibly good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's and I think I've told this to you before, in some of our offline conversations. It reminds me, at least the SEC and how their basketball is starting to emerge with a level of dominance that we haven't really seen before. It reminds me a little bit of how the Southern schools in the late 80s and early 90s in football, how their rosters began to look much different than the rosters of all the other teams around the country. Now, the thing that kind of stinks is that, like basketball doesn't have the same measurables as football, like, 40 times and shuttles and the 100-yard dash, So in football, it's much more measurable. Like, I could go back then in the 90s and look at Prep Stars recruiting handbook and look at all the 40 times of all the, the top, 500 recruits. And you could just plot it on like an Excel spreadsheet and see the difference. Like take the average of the 40 times of the wide receivers, the defensive ends, the linebackers at Miami, Florida State, Florida, etc., versus Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State. And just see how like the Midwestern schools kind of like increased a little bit in terms of, the speed of their rosters. Whereas like the Southern schools were going like this at a completely different slope in terms of their improvement. You can sense that's happening on the basketball side. We just can't actually measure it easily.
It's an eye test. Right. It's an eye test. And I think that, we whether it's online, offline, whatever, when we're talking about this, you see an SEC game in particular, or even a Big 12 game, like when you see Baylor play Houston,
right,
it feels different than watching Iowa play. I shouldn't even say that because I need to kind of go to the word, like UCLA playing Michigan State. That's right. That would be comparable. Would you agree? That would be a comparable, between the two, relatively speaking. Now, and we're going to see that in real time in the tournament. We're going to see these teams play each other, and it'll be interesting to see a week from now where we're going to be.
Right.
Like, are we going to see that the Big Ten has everybody is out of the tournament except Michigan State, sort of thing, or maybe do they go 0 for 7 going to the Sweet 16, which we have seen those years in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And I think part of this, with not just an eye test, but when you look at size and shooting profiles and driving profiles, when you can look at some of the analytics on some of these guys, and without going into synergy, maybe looking at some of the advanced stuff they have on, let's say, Torvik can kind of give you some ideas on some of these players, or looking at BPM would be another great example. Like looking at box plus minus as the season ends up for Big Ten wings versus wings on, SEC or even some Big 12 teams, the Big 12 teams.
Right.
That to me seems to be kind of where we want to maybe take this at this point in time and looking at it from that vantage point. But yeah, I think that trend in overall play, we saw more 3-pointers, we saw a lot, but a lot of this I think is just driven by the fact that you're seeing just a more open game. And I think for the Big Ten to fully leverage and maximize, I think this is why IU's got to really hit this coaching hire, by the way.
Yeah.
You got to get a guy who's going to get in here and be able to play the sort of basketball to get, use the bankroll and the advantages that an IU would have, get them into this conference and be able to start saying, okay, we're going to get the types of players more like the types of players that you're seeing out of the Big 12 and the SEC, versus trying to get the next generation of Fletcher lawyers to show up.
Right.
We need a Fletcher lawyer.
Yeah. An even better version of Fletcher lawyer.
Yeah. Let's get a kid that may not be as lethal when he's wide open off of actions. Yeah. Let's get a guy that can actually, do more than one thing effectively
and get himself open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, you looked at IU and you looked at, but again, I think that's where I think if IU can do anything in this search is you're going to have to get a leader in there, which then again makes it easier for guys like Dusty May. And now even you could argue Greg Gard to be able to get these types of players to play for them.
Right. Exactly.
And whether it's out of high school recruiting or the portal, it doesn't matter. Get those guys in that if we start seeing a bunch of offers that look like, Iowa and Purdue and give me Nebraska. Yeah, if we start seeing our offer sheets looking like that versus going against the big boys of, Alabama, Mississippi, Auburn, yeah, not even Kansas anymore. I'd say Baylor, Iowa State, going to those lists, Houston. We have to start looking and seeing those. Those are the types of players we're talking about that get you into that sort of top. If you want to be a top 5% team, that's who you got to have. You got to be there consistently with a chance to win it all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I was a few weeks back. I jumped on with Alex Bozich on his podcast On the Brink, and he said something that was interesting, and I agree. And I've heard many fans say the same thing. And he said that Auburn IU game, I guess it was last year, was kind of a wake-up call, I think, for fans just across the board in terms of understanding, like, okay, we can talk about like skill level and all that, and obviously you have to have, great skill to compete at a high level, but just the physicality and the athleticism, the speed, and just the bulk of that Auburn lineup, just you could tell is just a almost completely different sport that they were playing compared to what I was playing at the time. And so, yeah, that's kind of the challenge I think you have, which I do think, given IU's resources, is not completely outside the realm of possibility to build those kind of rosters. Because again, you do have the resources, and if you have the right kind of recruiting assistants that have those connections along the I-95 corridor and along the sort of like the SEC I-10 corridor as well, through like Louisiana, the Carolinas, into Georgia, Mississippi. If you have connections in those areas and get some of the better players in those regions, then yeah, you're basically playing at that level and recruiting from those pools. But that's kind of where you need to be. And like I said, Bob, it's like if you're not doing that, then you're not going to be competing against those teams.
And to kind of just pair that parlay looking at the whole portal thing too, because that's a part of this also, I think, where you just having guys that can actually get in and kind of get in early with them. You need what, 6 roughly?
Yeah.
7 guys out of 100.
Yeah.
And that's 100, and that's 100 every year. So you're talking those 7 guys are, so maybe out of a pool of 3 to 400 players potentially, you need 7 guys out of that group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and that's definitively doable. That is doable for a program with the resources IU is putting into basketball. It's also doable for all the other Big Ten programs, which I think kind of goes to this other thought of, well, really, I think kind of surprised, what didn't really surprise us about this whole area was that, you had some teams that are continuing to find ways of getting old. Like, I think Auburn's a good example of a team that continue to get old.
Right. Isn't Johnny Broom like our age now?
I think he is. And playing multiple years there too, I might add.
Yeah.
I think Mark Sears is right up there, either getting his doctorate at Alabama.
Yeah.
So you're looking at that sort of those 2 programs in particular. Houston also maintaining themselves. They really didn't surprise us in their upscales, right, and staying where they were at.
No, I mean, what we talked about, I think we had a prior pod where we talked about like how Kelvin recruits, and it's almost like a factory. He just finds these guys that are just like physically intimidating, great athletes, very committed to playing like hard-nosed defense. And he teaches them like just the smarts of basketball. Hey, here's how to run an offense, but I need you guys to go out there and basically just batter teams on the defensive end and make life impossible to get shots for the other team.
But the difference on this Samson team is I feel like they're offensively more connected, or they're better. They're not. I don't think they're going to be as reliant as much on defense as they have been to ensure. Now, I could be wrong with it.
Well, he's infused a few offensively gifted guys. I mean, you got LJ Cryer from Baylor for that reason, because he wanted to have some increases shooting. So, and you're right. I mean, that's kind of been the problem Houston's had in the tournament before, is that again they're really a great team when they're going against teams that don't have their level of like athleticism and physicality, because they just completely dominate them. It's like the 85 Bears versus, like a high school team. But on the offensive end, they just struggle if they're going against a Kansas or another team that has the same level of athlete, but actually can shoot. And that's where they've kind of come up short, is that they just can't put the ball in the basket as much. Now they're actually starting to do that a little bit better. And so that's like you said, that's the difference.
4th best 3-point shooting conversion team in the country right now. They're almost at 40%.
Yeah. And
so
that's not what they used to be.
Not what they used to be. No. And that's, so there's something to be said here for them to, and so there's not really a surprise on us, because, and I think that's where you talk about a guy like Kelvin Sampson, where he saw his errors and, or not errors, but just saw where the weaknesses were, and went out and basically, and these are such thin margins too, I might add.
Right.
One little area might make the difference. We'll see where that is in March, but I'm not sure at this point where he's going to be. I think he's, it's just going that he can, even at this late stage in his career, figure some things out.
Right. Other surprises, or other not surprises, let's say.
UCLA to me was something that was that I thought, and again, we are kind of a show about Indiana a little bit, but IU and UCLA were both in the 10, that 4th group of college basketball in the 90s in KenPom last year.
Yeah.
We figured one would survive and get out, but UCLA was very impressive in how they got from where they were to, I believe there was, let me just see, 6 or 7 seed, I believe.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, 7 seed. Yes. So they moved up into firmly into the third tier there, up towards the top of it, moved themselves off the bubble, had a really good season across the board, and recovered to the point where Mick Cronin can kind of extend himself a little bit further, have the type of team that he's looking for. That can actually be more competitive. I think offensively they're better. I think they've shot the ball a lot better, especially from three.
Yeah.
And he did it, I think, he pretty much terraformed his roster, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he brought in some key players and some guys that I think did better even than what he expected. I mean, he brought in, was it Tyler Bilodeau from Oregon State? I think Bilodeau's I think he's a sophomore now. But he was kind of like, I think he was kind of in the running for Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. Actually lost out to Miles Rice. But Bilodeau came in, and he's actually their leading scorer this year. He's like 13 points a game, but he's just like a steady Eddie. I mean, he's like a good player, but he's like steady, and I think that's what UCLA kind of needed. And yeah, I think just locking down the rest of the roster. I mean, I think Eric Daly, Sebastian Mack came in and helped. Sky Clark Sky Clark was one of those like wild card kind of guys that has just bounced around college basketball, but you thought, okay, the kid's got talent, and if some coach can ever harness that to some degree, then maybe he can become a really like decent upper tier contributor on a good team. And it seems like Cronin's actually kind of found some way to make him a little bit more productive than what he was in his prior stints. So good for him.
And that's, I think, where the portal's a lot of fun for us to watch, because it does give players a second, third chance in many respects. Right. There have always been kind of journeymen in baseball, journeymen in basketball, journeymen in football, where you just kind of have to come in and maybe fill a need. I think for some of these kids, it's a good chance for, like, again, a kid situation like Sky Clark, who was in, I think it was Illinois to Louisville to UCLA. And that was kind of a good opportunity. So, for him, and some programs, some coaches are going to be better at doing that than others. And I think Mick Cronin, again, kind of learned some things along the way. We weren't surprised necessarily. I wasn't surprised. I think either one of us were surprised that they were going to improve. Mm-hmm. I also really wasn't surprised to know that there was kind of one survivor out of the Big Ten this year that was going to make that jump. Like if they're, right. It was going to be either UCLA or Indiana. I don't think it's hard for me to live in a world where we're just going to be both.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge just because when you're relying on the portal, or let's say if the majority of the improvement that you're expecting from your team is going to come from the portal, it becomes so batch dependent, right? And we've talked about that before. It's kind of like the funny situation with Missouri this year. Missouri last year relied on the portal, and it was kind of a disaster. They just were not able to get things going like they did the year prior when the new coach came in and just had an amazing first year. Then second year they crashed. Third year, now they're back up again because again, Gates found a really good batch of kids like he did in year one. So yeah, there's just like, depending upon how much you are relying on the portal, there's just going to be more volatility the more dependent you are on the portal for, like, let's say the number of starters you're looking for. So again, you could be much more jagged than a little bit more smooth transition if you're relying on some more, let's say, sophomore and junior and senior high school recruits that you've developed over time and you're kind of relying on and are aware of what their capabilities are.
Well, who had a better who has a bigger ceiling, Tamar Bates or Sean East?
Right.
And there's some of that too. I mean, Tony Parker coming in and putting in good minutes for him too. I mean, it's there. I do think, and it goes back to this continuity question, that even in the portal, you can still create continuity just in who you bring and when you bring them in, especially if you're doing sophomores to juniors. There's something to be said for that, where if you could be a Power 5 program. Now, the problem you run into is there's such a limited number of kids that are Power 5 players like Tamar Bates or Power 5 players like Tony Parker that can come in.
Perkins.
Sorry. Wow, man, that was Freudian slip on a Monday morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Here's my green. But no, Perkins, thank you. Boy, saved myself only slight embarrassment there. But yeah, with Perkins coming in there, so it's like there's only so many of those types of players that you can kind of pull. And then you also have to make those decisions on those guys who are moving upwards from a MAC or another, or even an American type conference who are looking to go those directions.
Right.
Along the same time. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not. I think that we talk about regressions a lot on this program, and there were two that at this time last year, a bunch of people were sitting around in their office pools, putting them at the top of their brackets, putting them all the way to the end of Purdue and UConn.
Right.
These regressions didn't surprise us.
No.
At all.
No.
Right.
They fit the pattern pretty strongly in terms of what you would expect, based upon their rosters, what would likely come about in the following year.
I mean, just briefly, I'm going to start with Purdue, and we've talked a lot about Zach Edey, and I would like to just kind of throw out the thing that this doesn't take a thing away from Trey Kaufman-Renn, especially on the offensive end.
Yeah,
Trey Kaufman-Renn had a really good season. Braden Smith had a really good season. I think their BPMs would back that up.
right.
But you're looking at a program that they have systemically. And Painter probably got as much out of him as he's going to get out of him, especially with all the, with kind of, and he's also kind of, and we'll talk about this in a minute, some terraforming, but who on that team can command a double team?
Right.
And
yeah, right now, I mean, they sometimes double team Braden Smith just to force the ball out of his hand into a non-double threat player. So.
And then get him into rotation. And then defensively, when you hear about the complexity Painter puts into his coverage, like when you heard about, when he spent that brilliant 2-minute answer, that there are multiple breakdowns of using video to show that.
Right.
I mean, it's not just switch it. He's got this down to an excruciating detail as to how they were going to defend UCLA of all teams.
Right.
And who stops, okay, so what defensively are you going to stop guys as a perimeter, or you don't have the rim protection you had a year ago either. So I don't know. I think
you know where they are on blocks this year?
No, where are they?
357th.
Where were they, like fourth last year? I mean, they were
they were top. 10? Yeah, I mean they were top towards the top. Yeah,
top 5% at least, top 5. I mean, top 5%. Yeah,
they were. This is that phenomenon we were talking about prior, about the tendency for teams without multiple studs to sink after losing that one mega all-star player. And Edey, this Purdue losing Zach Edey is the perfect example of that. I mean, Edey's a 16.8 BPM last year. He's two-time National Player of the Year. If Edey played on an old style North Carolina team or a Kentucky or Duke team, and they lost him, then the regression would have probably been more shallow in terms of how much they would fall back, just because typically those teams had multiple other all-stars that would fill in the productivity gap. With Purdue, they just didn't have that. I mean, obviously Braden Smith's a really good player and he's an All-American candidate, but they don't have 5 or 6 guys that can make up for the loss of Zach Edey, and that's sort of the problem. And you see just across the board on their metrics, you just see Edey is clearly just the hole he's left. It's obvious where he was making contributions above the anticipated productivity line of the rest of the roster. I mean, if you look at the rebound margin, last year they're plus 10. What do you think they're this year?
Couldn't tell you.
Plus 2.
It's less.
Plus 2. So a full 8 rebound per game margin change, which is not a small change. Free throw attempts, they went from 11th in the country to 172nd. Obviously, who's drawing a lot of those fouls? And again, blocks down to basically towards the bottom of college basketball. And And on top of all that, I think the thing that is becoming obvious, and I know Purdue people have kind of been chattering about this as well. I think Braden Smith is very tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know he's logging right now
90% plus of their minutes.
37 over 37 a game average with 9 games with full 40 minutes.
Never comes off.
Never comes out.
Never comes.
He doesn't come out. Yeah.
I'm gonna kind of, the one thing I'm gonna push back is it's not like these guys have actually fallen into like bankruptcy here. They're a 4 seed.
Oh yeah, no.
We're talking about a team that regressed from the top 2% of college basketball to the next 3%.
Yeah,
and firmly put themselves in there.
Yeah, but they were not able, obviously, to shake off losing Edey and continue on exactly as where they were. Yeah.
No, but now it's like their water has found their level because this is where Purdue is usually at.
Yeah,
when you really think about where Purdue has been in the Painter era, since the baby Boilers, especially, this is a sum of all parts group that they have to play full team basketball without really anybody that can kind of command a double. I mean, yeah, you're using rebounding. I'll use 2% shooting percentage.
Yeah,
last year they were 47% defense on 2-point shooting percentage. This year 56%.
Yeah.
So and blocks, so I just looked the blocks up. Yeah, they only had they were middle of the pack with 9.3% of the possessions of the block.
Yeah.
This year they're a lot worse this year. So you kind of start doing the math though. There's a lot to be impressed with Purdue, but this regression, the question is going to be where do they go from here?
Right.
And yes, they lost to Jacobson, Ken, right? They lost him, who was supposedly going to be which they had to bring
talent, yeah. I think
they had to bring first back in. Raleigh Burgess will be probably, I think, a replacement for Kaufman Wren moving forward. I'm not sure where Will Berg fits into the future plans. Wait and see.
Right.
But I'm also looking at the Jacardi Harris, the CJ Cox, the Miles Colvin, and I'm looking at what Painter's looking to bring in on wings, slots. He's looking at a lot of sweet spot kids that he hasn't looked at in a long time in those spots. It's going to be interesting to see if he can pull off. If he gets to get 2 or 3 of those kids to go with the stable of a couple of the other guys we're talking about, he could terraform his team a little bit. You could see a different type of Purdue. Like we were talking at the start of the show or the start of this segment, which teams are going to be looking to upgrade that wing, the slots and wings, basically. Your off ball, not your post, not your point, everybody else. I think Purdue's looking at doing that. And that's where, again, programs have got to, be put on notice that, you're going to have to up your game in those areas to bring those types of players into your program.
Exactly.
Now, can he find the right fits? That's the question. I mean, are Cox, Harris, and Colvin going to fit those areas?
Yeah, I mean, some of those guys are a little bit of overlap, I think. I think one thing that would really help Purdue if they got someone other than Braden Smith to be an effective ball handler.
Yeah.
Because you see, so often, like what teams are doing is they're getting the ball out of Braden's hands into someone else's, and then just locking down. It's like, okay, those guys can't drive, or they don't do it effectively. I think Purdue would be great if they could find another guy that could really attack the rim and be like a secondary ball handler. Now, maybe Harris, if he improves a little bit, I think Harris is a good player. It feels like Colvin is just kind of settled into being like more of a jump shooter. And I don't know if Heidi's going to do that. So again, there's some potential in those guys, but I think, and I'm sure Painter's working on this. Yeah, they definitely some attackers versus just more shooters.
And if I'm a Purdue fan, I would actually trust Matt Painter to at least do enough in the area of player development over the offseason if he's got him bought in.
Yeah.
If those skills are there with those kids, he can maybe unharness enough to make it a threat. Versus now, you're not going to be all American, you're not going to be top 5% of players at doing it, but he can maybe get a little more playmaking out of some of them. Totally. Is where I'm kind of going with this. So, which is kind of, and again, so we have the conversation about Purdue. The other one that we should talk about that really didn't surprise us at all was UConn and their regression.
Yeah.
If anything surprised me is how far they fell. And part of that was basically their horrible performance at Maui hurt
Yeah.
them immeasurably,
Yeah.
or it was very measurable because they went from, again, number 1 overall seed back-to-back national champions to 8 seed.
Yeah.
They're still dangerous, but
yeah, I mean, they still have talent. I mean, what they have I think they have like 9 top like 75 kids on their roster, so they're not exactly dying
not
for
poverty. They're not a poverty program.
Yeah.
But you lose Donovan Clingan, you lose Tristan Newton, you lose Cam Spencer, and those 3, and then who was the 4th kid? They lost another one. Jesus, freshman. Oh gosh,
Castle.
They lost Castle. So Stephon Castle. So you have 4 guys that you're replacing in starters. They brought up, and Carabine sticks around. They had Solomon Ball still on the roster, and then Samson Johnson. So you're about 3 in. You bring Liam McNeely as a freshman, and then you had and we were talking about this right before the show started. And then they tried the portal. They tried to find the next Tristan Newton, and it came up snake eyes.
Yeah, Aiden Mahaney. And Mahaney's he's one of those like West Coast kids from one of the smaller conferences. He was from St. Mary's, and I think there was some hope that he would be sort of a fill-in to some degree for Newton, although he's just, he's not nearly, he doesn't have the length or athleticism of Newton, but, he's a pretty skilled kid, and he was still pretty young. But yeah, he really did not work out. I mean, Newton, I'm trying to remember, Newton, where was his box plus minus? He was
pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, Newton, let's see. Newton was at a 10.4 blocks plus minus last year.
Good.
Yeah, 10.4, which obviously is like all-American level. Aiden Mahaney was negative 3.0, which is very, very no bueno if you're trying to force that guy to become a starter, which was the plan that Hurley had in bringing him in. So he's kind of been scrambling the roster a little bit based upon at least that, let's say, misread.
What were Ball and Dyra there? What were those?
You mean in terms of what their
BPM is this year?
Oh, let's see if I can find it. I think Ball was at like 6 or his Ball was 6.6 and Dyra is like 6.5. Not bad.
That's pretty good. But when you're going
from 10 to 6 is obviously it's a jump.
And you throw Cam Spencer into the mix. You throw Cam Spencer in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane productivity versus good, and good doesn't look as good as it did.
Right, exactly. So they're kind of, it's not a surprise. They're about where you expect, and you're right. The interesting thing will be next year. Like, what do they look like next year? Because I think I'm very curious to see what they do with their point guard if they go out in the portal and just try to find like a real killer at point guard. If they can, they get Tristan Newton 2.0 or some version of that, then I think they'll be in pretty good shape because they have a lot of other great pieces around them.
Did we expect the portal to be this chaotic?
In terms of what? Like
in terms of not all the movement. We knew the movement was coming, and we also don't know how the portal's going to look with all the COVID kids being. This is the last year of the COVID kid,
right?
The last COVID eligibility, but how unpredictable. I guess if you studied free agency in baseball or football or the NBA, you could definitely say, "Oh, it's really hard to peg a free agent acquisition."
Oh, you mean like in predicting their performance once they move from point A to point B? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something I'm looking at, like, because the portal's new. I'm trying to kind of do that same analysis, like looking at, okay, like what's the average, let's say, BPM variance between a kid moving from like the Mountain West to Power 5.
Right.
What does that look like? And you're right that there's I've not really found any really strong correlations yet, but again, it's still early. I mean, we're still just dealing with a couple hundred entries in terms of like, the top end of, college basketball of incoming portal players. But as time goes by, I'm sure there might be something that, that can become something like a predictive model. But right now, you're right. There's just, it's kind of catch as catch can. You just don't know exactly what you're going to get with some of these kids, particularly when I think it's one thing, it's a little bit more predictable if you're going from Power 5 school to Power 5 school. It's
Right.
a little bit less predictable when you're coming from a lower tier school. I think that, at least anecdotally, I think, just looking at a lot of the stuff I see, it's like that is one indicator that has some degree of validity.
So yeah, I think that's, and that it'll just be interesting to see kind of, and we're just now, a week away from roughly, or kind of the portal's going to be opening here fairly soon.
Yeah.
In the
a
coming
week
days.
from today, I guess.
A week from today.
Yeah.
So we'll, everyone will be kind of watching that. So watch watch your Twit space, or your Blue
Interwebs.
Book or whatever. Yeah, the interwebs for whatever source you're going at.
Yeah.
And just but again, so we talked about some of the stuff that really didn't surprise us. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some things that may have caught us a little bit out of left field this season. So when we get back on X's and Joes.
Welcome back to X's and Joes. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. All right, Bob, let's discuss the surprises. And we may not have exactly the same list as each other, but I think we had some overlap on some of the teams and I guess other entries in our log. I guess one. Do you want to start with teams, or do you want to start with bigger 30,000 foot stuff?
So I was thinking we go teams and then to the 30,000 foot stuff, and then the last segment we're obviously going to talk about IU because we really want to talk about how they did or didn't surprise us.
Yeah.
Tune in for that.
Okay, exactly. Well,
stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, so that'll be a happy one. Yeah,
that'll be. Oh boy, we're just a barrel of monkeys on that one.
It's going to be perfect that we have where we're talking about IU on St. Patrick's Day, because there is a kind of Frank McCourt sort of quality to the IU season this year.
I was going to say get the green beer out.
Yeah.
It's a 11:08 on the East Coast as we're talking, or in the Eastern time zone, and Bob's already talking about day drinking on his spring break.
Exactly. Yeah, not Angela's ashes, but Martha's ashes.
Martha's ashes. Man.
Yeah. So maybe I guess so. If we're starting with teams, let's maybe we start with one I think we both had circled, which is Penn State.
Penn State.
Maybe part of it is because we were both exposed to that home loss that we attended in Bloomington last year, where it looked like the Lions were really kind of moving in a really strong direction in terms of their roster and their. So yeah, maybe we can dive in on them first because I think they were a little bit of surprise in terms of what they've kind of become.
They beat Purdue in December. I think that's when we talked about it on the show a little bit, because could Mike Rhodes be after Micah Shrewsbury to Mike Rhodes? And that kind of goes into the worse than expected. We'll get to them too.
Yeah.
But you just kind of thought, well, maybe they're going to create some sort of Nittany Lion way out in Happy Valley.
Yeah. That
Penn State might actually become maybe not a basketball powerhouse, but could become a strong program in the Big Ten, and they were seeming to trend in that direction. Right. And so it's kind of a tale of two Bob and Mike going to a basketball game together stories, where Mike hops a flight, watches Penn State, just dissect IU in February of 2024, and then we're out there 11 months later at the Palestra, and we watch. And again, Penn State played well, but they didn't
shoot well, but the other stuff they did okay. Yeah,
it was basically a shot making game, which is what you ultimately in basketball. What you want to basically say, did we make more shots than our opponent? Right. You don't want situations where they were able to command a different element of the game, whether it's rebounding or defensive pressure that creates turnovers, or can they scheme? Where you have either a talent or schematic differentiation that is so stark that it takes that shooting percentage and that conversion out of play, where they're able. Where what you want is you want two teams that are just basically going at it, and can this team shoot better than the other team? That's what you're going to see in the tournament. That's people talk all the time. Man, why does all these. I don't see anything schematic that's making a difference because they're all really, really good, and now this has come down to a shot making game.
Exactly.
You're not going to see that, and so that was what you saw with that IU Penn State game. But I think both of them was that they came down to shooting the basketball, and Penn State missed, IU hit. And IU hit in ways, and they were able to get their, they were able to capitalize on their runs better than Penn State could capitalize on theirs.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, though, Penn State just didn't materialize.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it just has to do with just you're looking at, again, very razor thin margins for error.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it wasn't Mike Rhodes necessarily, where it's like you're in a very competitive conference, and if you're not hitting shots, and Ace Baldwin was not exactly a 40% 3-point shooter.
Yeah, I think that's when I summarize what I think maybe Penn State's biggest problem is that I don't think Ace Bailey is a primary scorer on a good team. I think
Ace Bailey or Ace Baldwin? Help me out with that.
Oh, sorry, Bailey. Ace Baldwin.
Ace Bailey and Tony Parker are now playing in it.
Exactly, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, Ace Bailey definitely on Rutgers is a primary scorer. Ace Baldwin, I don't think is what I would say a primary scorer on a good team. Baldwin is one of the best defensive guards in the country. I think like him, Lipsy, and Ziegler are the best defensive guards out there. I think it's tough when you're being assigned to the other team's best offensive player. And your coach is saying, okay, your primary job out there is to go and stop that guy. Oh, by the way, you're also your primary job is to lead the team in scoring. I think that's a problem. Penn State has some pretty good players in terms of, I guess, at least what they're, how they look on paper. It's like Freddie DeLeon, Dunn. But those two guys are probably maybe the ones that Rhodes thought would come in and add a lot of offensive punch, but they really just haven't. I mean, those two guys I think Dunn has actually regressed from last year. And I mean, DeLeon is still he's I think a sophomore this year, but I mean, he's top 75 recruit coming out of Tennessee as a transfer. Hicks and Kern are both good. I think Kern actually is maybe a little better than what was expected, but I think it's pretty clear that it was not expected that Ace Ball was going to have to be like the primary scorer, but unfortunately just kind of turned out that way. And I think it just the whole team is kind of been struggling under that, trying to find like some more offensive punch. And I don't think and also on the other end, I don't think they're as good defensively as maybe what they're trying to scheme. Because if you look at like that Purdue game, the reason they ran Purdue out of the gym is because they turned them over like 20 something times. I think they got 7 turnovers off of out of Kaufman Wren alone. I mean, they were just basically hawking the ball whenever it was going out of Braden Smith's hands.
Well, you saw them do that to IU. We saw them do it close up to IU as well. They were doing the same thing.
Exactly. And
that's
so
high risk, high reward. That's a high risk, high reward defensive.
Yeah, and unfortunately they paid the risk at different times during the year. They were just not able to become that kind of like ball hawking, high turnover and converting all the other end kind of team. And so that combined again with sort of like the offensive disbalance of maybe what they're projecting is kind of what put a little bit of a ceiling on them this year.
What's funny, and I just looked them up on KenPom. They were 17 spots higher on KenPom this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
Offensively and defensively, they were better by 20 spots offensively or so, 20, and then about 7 spots defensively and ranking. What you're seeing is, so maybe it's one of those things where it's just a question. I think for us, it was more or less a thing where we thought they were going to take a significant jump up.
Yeah.
And I think taking the overall ranking out of the play, they shot up and they shot right back down. It was one of those things where you may see, and maybe year 3, you see something more out of Mike Rhodes. It'll just be interesting to see kind of how he progresses and moves on.
Right, exactly.
I think some other regressions that kind of surprised us. For me, Arkansas was a bit of a surprise with Calipari moving over.
Yeah, you think?
I think, and not because, and by regression, I think that I was pretty sure that UK, that the team that he took with him to Arkansas, because it wasn't just Calipari, he took the whole package over.
Right.
And I kind of thought they would perform better than because Boogie Flant, and he was injured, and you had some other considerations. But I was a little surprised that it wasn't more like taking a UK team that's usually solidly, that sort of 5 seed and up.
Yeah.
It kind of felt like that would be one of the Calipari teams that would be a 5 seed and up type of team.
Yeah.
And I think it was more like, and they've always been in the SEC. That's not the factor. So it was a matter of, okay, well, you take an SEC team, you move from Kentucky to Arkansas, and it just didn't work as well as I think the Arkansas faithful, for what they're paying, that wasn't what they were expecting.
You mean you didn't move for free?
It's a shocker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought the Walton family just, said, or the Tyson family, or whoever was funding that. Yeah,
I think it may have been a team effort.
Yeah, exactly. The whole state contributed. Yeah, no, I agree. I was expecting a little bit more of them because I like a lot of the individual players. I mean, I really like Wagner. Ivisic is really kind of an interesting player. I mean, 7 foot whatever and can pop threes. And Tiero, I mean, he's a guy that IU recruited at one time. And he went to prep school out here in Pennsylvania, so he's always someone I've kind of followed. I wonder if the issue was it was almost too much of like a dirty dozen kind of ragtag team, because you think about it, they almost had like 4 different sources of talent for that team. They all had to kind of piece them together. It's like the UK kids they brought over, again, Tiero, Ivisic, and Wagner. The UK commits that were coming in that he had to pull over, which was like Knox, Fland, and Richmond. Then I think he had 1 or 2 Arkansas holdovers. I think he had Brazil. Brazil was like the main like reasonable starter level guy that was still left over. And and then the regular transfers, I think he brought in Adu from Tennessee and Davis. So there's just a lot of movement there, and like not just taking like a given team and then adding guys on top. It's like you're really taking cores from a whole other team and adding it to cores of an existing team, and then you're taking your current commits from another school and adding them to the transfers coming in. So I think maybe just a lot of movement, despite all the talent. And believe me, there were some games you watched this year where, especially like that Kentucky game, where they went into Rupp Arena. I mean, that there were some clear advantages that Arkansas team had in terms of talent, even against that Kentucky team. We thought like, man, they kind of actually look like they have a little bit more, more than what the Kentucky team even had, even though the Cats are clearly a better team this year.
Well, and I think part of it comes down to scheming offense versus scheming defense. And defense is actually, I'll say this, defense is easier to implement early.
Mm-hmm.
Offense is really hard because it requires,
unless you're doing the pack line, which then takes 3 years to figure it out.
Right. And so if it takes you 3 years to figure out how to run a defensive scheme, find a new defensive scheme. It's like the days of and now, now you're gonna go. Okay, I'm contractually obligated to say this now that Fran's gone. I'm contractually obligated to say that if you're trying to scheme your way into multi-year schematic constructs in basketball, you've made it too complicated. It's time to go find something new.
Right.
And that's, I think, with Calipari offensively, his stuff's not exactly complex, but it is one of those things where we've evolved, much like when we had conversations about Dean Smith, Bob Knight, Mike Krzyzewski in the mid-90s, and the question was, how do you evolve your motion constructs?
Yeah.
How do you, if you're John Calipari, how do you evolve your dribble drive constructs?
Yeah.
Because your offensive efficiency wasn't where you needed it to be successful in today's college basketball, especially in the Southeastern Conference.
Right.
If Rick Barnes is figuring it out, which it's still debatable, talk to me in a week and a half, talk to me in 2 weeks about Rick Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
But if those guys if Bruce Pearl is definitely figuring it out,
right,
Kelvin Sampson is figuring it out, you need to kind of figure that out too, where you need to start figuring out offensively how you're going to get the right types of shots where versus just depending on your level 1, level 2 reads.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really where Calipari is struggling and has struggled for the last few years. Last year, not so much because he had Reed Shepherd, but
Yeah.
Reed Shepherd it's kind of like saying, well, we're a much better baseball team with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. We're scheming our way into that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you go back to the Dirty Dozen thing. Like it's like, okay, well, if you have Jim Brown dropping the hand grenades in the thing, you're going to look really good. I mean, that makes the strategy look pretty brilliant if Jim Brown's the one who's making the final run for you.
Right.
Not every player can make that. So just like Reed Shepherd, not every player can do that. Do what he does, which was just almost superhuman.
Yeah.
So that's
they kind of look a little bit like some of the old, lesser capable Kentucky teams, where they're really they have great athleticism, great talent, but they can't shoot.
We're gonna block you. We're gonna block you. We're gonna protect that rim and protect that paint. And it's like, you're exactly this. They're not They were not a great shooting team by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not, like I said, their numbers, if you just kind of match them, look like some of those like lower end Calipari teams of Kentucky, just in terms of like, a lot of pretty decent at blocking shots, but can't hit outside shots.
Exactly. And they also didn't offensively rebound as well as they should. If you're going to shoot that poorly, you need to be able to offensive rebound better and get more second chance opportunities. Would be my counter there. So who else? Some other surprises for you as to who was not. I mean, go ahead and throw another one out.
Well, I think at least in terms of a stylistic surprise, probably Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I mean, how many jokes have you and I told over the years about like coming up with metaphors about how boring Wisconsin basketball is to watch. And now you watch, like there have been games this year where I told myself, oh, Wisconsin's playing, let's like tune in. And I thought like there's no way like 10 years ago in the middle of the Bo Ryan era I would have ever said that.
Wisconsin, the Ryan's daughter of college basketball.
Ryan's
for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know this, just Google the movie. You'll know why today on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
It's like I'm surrounded. It's like we're surrounded by. We got Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge on the River Kwai, Dr. Zhivago, and Ryan's daughter. And it's not a bad film. It's just TCM showing it at 2:30 this morning. I think to help insomniacs need help.
Yeah.
So The Quiet Man's going to be is in prime time. Ryan's daughter at 2:30.
Oh yeah. So my brother and I used to love The Quiet Man.
That's one of the greatest. But no, I mean it's like and I think that it comes down to Greg Gard being able to evolve, Greg Gard being able to figure out kind of how to do things. And they're not exactly playing like we're not talking Arkansas 40 minutes of hell here.
Yeah.
But they've got they've increased their transition game has gone up a couple 3 possessions a game. They're actually taking better advantage of opportunities of different advantageous situations. They're not so tempo dependent as they were early in Gard's career, definitely under Bo Ryan, definitely under Dick Bennett. Yeah. So, and the portal kind of affords them some opportunities to do some things a little differently. Now they're still Wisconsin. But it's like I think that you're seeing that as we're talking about earlier, that upgrading. A bit of upgrading, especially in the wing positions, especially in the slot positions. They're definitely not a post-dependent team anymore, to say the least.
Not really, no. Yeah, you look at them. Yes, they let's see, they're up to 36 nationally in scoring points per game.
Yeah,
they're like right at 80, I think, and so it's not it's definitely not the old Badgers of old where they're winning games in the low 60s with Ben Brust as their leading scorer.
Right.
I mean, Tanji's at what, 20 points a game. Blackwell's are up 15. So again, they're doing the right thing in terms of like trying to modernize their team. They have two attacking, shooting guards that are very difficult to stop from either end. Remember, I think I'm trying to remember when we had this conversation. It was one of their pods, maybe it was like the preseason pod. And remember, I made some comment about Tanji. I said, yeah, I think that kid's probably going to lead the league in like free throw shooting, or I said something like he's going to live at the free throw line.
Right.
That was a better prediction than even I anticipated in terms of what his actual numbers are. I don't know if I've seen this in at least a decade or two. Tanji is, let's see, he's look at his numbers. He has 221 free throw attempts and 201 makes for 92%. So that means he's 20th nationally in free throw attempts and 8th in percentage. That almost never happens. You almost never find a guy that's top 20 in both, because typically like the best shooters are guys that don't get the line very much.
Right.
Usually like in a full season, the best free throw shooters, they'll be, let's say, between 50 and 160 in terms of their attempts. Tanji's already way up at 200.
Right.
And then add on top of the fact that he's shooting at 92%, which is absolutely insane. So that's such a huge weapon to have on your team, especially think about in March, where so many games just come down to guys in the last 2-3 minutes of the game driving the lane, picking up fouls, and just taking multiple free throw attempts towards the end of the game. If you can get a guy that can just get the line that easy and hit almost everything he's shooting, then yeah, you got a huge advantage.
And they're not named Chucky Hepburn or Chucky Hepburn, who did have a good year at Louisville, or AJ Storr. That's one I was thinking of at Kansas that had some issues. But you look at that, it also made Crowell, Klesmet, and and Winter better ball players too,
right?
Because now they can be more efficient doing what they do, on the court. And so that's just something. I wasn't expecting them, or for that matter, Maryland doing what they did this year. I don't think we can talk about that, but just briefly seeing the impact of a Derek Queen, seeing briefly how all that kind of worked on the backcourt.
Yeah,
because along the same lines, I know we talked about this early as well, that what kind of surprised us was just how would we have put any percentage of the equity of our homes into the idea, if you had said that Kentucky, Louisville, and Michigan all three would make the tournament, would you have put any money into that?
No, I would have put money on maybe one of them making the tournament, maybe possibly two, but not three.
Not three. Yeah. Not with what they were having to overcome.
Right.
And it just kind of, so I think, again, and all three did it on offense. All three did it on terraforming their offensive concepts off of whatever Kenny Payne, and again, I would say Kenny Payne, John Calipari, and Juwan Howard using more of a traditionalist approach, more of a hierarchical approach.
Right.
Whereas the other three come in with more of a meritocratic offensive construct.
Right.
Where we are going to find the best shot, not get these guys the best shot.
Exactly.
I think that was a huge differentiation. And all this obviously is a good lead-in conversation for what may be coming. But for us, it's, I think, looking at this, you saw, just briefly, Danny Wolf and Todd Golden, where you see how two bigs, and then you have Cheddar playing, he's still there as well. Yeah. I think they were, Michigan was definitely more stable than the other two from roster, but I think Dusty May got every ounce out of those players, every ounce of talent out of those players. The guards weren't great. The guards were,
well, they were up and down. Yeah. For the most,
they were
talent, but there was definitely, there was a lot of variability. Donaldson kind of kicked in the Big Ten tournament, which got them to where they are. But yeah, he was definitely not doing that all year.
No,
and Burnett, same way, Gale, Gale's kind of been another roller coaster ride.
But it's like when you can figure out that maybe your best overall handler or your best overall playmaker happens to be 7 foot tall.
Yeah.
And you use him as such, and you don't just stubbornly try to put him into a traditional big role, where you're actually running inversion with a 7-footer.
Right. That was great. You remember that game we watched in Bloomington? Yeah. How many times did Wolf do something that we both kind of looked at each other as like, all right, can't stop that.
No, it's just tip. Not even tip your cap. Take your cap off and bow.
Yeah.
Take your cap off. It's also got 25 in range. It's like,
yeah.
I can't remember who said. Somebody said that. I heard it somewhere. I can't credit exactly who said it, but what's my original thought? Hey, Dusty May, taught Danny Wolf the fact that he could actually play basketball.
Yeah.
Like he actually uncorked something in this kid that we knew was there. I think if you talk to some of our friends, like a Sam Story would tell you, it was there.
Yeah.
It was definitely there.
Yeah.
But you just had to get him around the right system, the right guys, and the right environment to be able to show it.
And you know what that's going to do for Michigan? They're recruiting. The recruiting for those kind of kids is going to be. There's going to be no ceiling for Michigan accessing those kind of recruits.
Dusty May already had Golden.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's got another one.
Yeah,
you're right. It's really going to be, and especially if you start looking at if this game goes more international,
right?
He's getting international bigs. That it's like, you're not just getting stand and dunk guys. You're getting, here, go on the weak side block and take, and take level 3 cuts and dives. It's like, no, you're getting guys who are going to be able to change the way the game is played on the collegiate level.
Yep.
So there's that. Mark Pope with what he did at Kentucky, and they've and again, all these teams have had some issues here and there where they've dropped some games, but
they had some injuries too. I mean, that's kind of put a cap on what Kentucky's done this year.
But you can't. You look at the fact that you had an entirely rebuilt roster, and we go back a decade at IU when Tom Crean took over. When you had a terraformed roster, it's a whole different environment, right?
Right.
I think UK, a lot of it just came down to, and again, this was a hire that the fan base was, well, we expected Nate Oates or Scott Drew.
Yeah.
There was the emotion of getting Mark Pope back. I think the traditional fan was like, well, but all he's got is a resume of being a Kentucky player. But at the same time, I think a lot of it came down, they really they got the right type of players coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And systemically, he worked on bringing what worked so well for him at BYU over to UK, which with SEC type players was able to kind of get them into a position where they were able to score.
Yeah.
And offensively be able to be as competitive as they were competitive. And that's the other thing. It's not just winning and losing, it's how competitive were they, and they were competitive. They're a 3 seed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think stylistically, it made sense for Kentucky to go after a guy that was, more offensively oriented. Again, you have Kentucky's resources. It's probably better to go after an offense first guy versus a defense first guy.
They had to.
Yeah. And I think, if you're not making a option A hire, then that's the kind of things you have to start like prioritizing. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to get, the guy that's won championships and is just, I was like guaranteed, but like a high probability of like being just a killer coach. The thing you look for then is like, okay, stylistically, do I think this guy's style translates well to our school and can attract recruits given our resources to be able to attract recruits in the first place?
True. And that's, and the other thing was, and that was, I think what Pope had coming in was that he had the ability to kind of show a kid like Kirk Rosilla, who actually was injured early and probably, again, could have made them better. Again, they're better than they're metrically better than they were last year with the same seed line.
Yeah.
With the same seed line. And Otega Owe, bringing him in from Oklahoma was a huge coup for them, in that situation. Amari Williams coming in.
You took a hard look at Williams, I remember.
Took a hard look at him. Lamont Butler coming in from San Diego State. you have some players that are in here that are that and again, getting in the right type of system where you're not teaching them necessarily hierarchical basketball, which is more complex.
Mm-hmm.
You're teaching them how to play, which allows you more freedom and flexibility, especially with ball handlers.
Right.
And being able to make the right read, the right play. And yeah, I mean, you definitely had some guys that had a higher shot volume, don't get me wrong. But when you have, you're the meritocracy system works. It's just you have to be able to get the right guy teaching it. And I also think the tone of that program changed. The culture of that program changed.
Yeah, Kentucky. In what way do you think that's true?
Calipari, I think it was more that I don't want to use the term. I'm going to use East Coast vibe and feel, where it's kind of like, I kind of that, I'm the godfather protecting my kids sort of thing, or I'm over, that sort of full embracing. Whereas I think you get more of a servant leader vibe out of Mark Pope.
Right.
That it's about a holistic approach to culture where, it's less me as the leader of the pyramid and me instead being in the center of a circle where we're all kind of just interdependently working together.
He's politicked well, it seems. There's a lot I know in Kentucky fan pages and things like that. He's the guy that's kind of going up to the fans that stay afterwards. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, well, there's this fan that's, that's in like a wheelchair and like comes up and like shakes their hand and spends like 10 minutes with them. Like he's doing that stuff like really well. And I think that's like, I won't say it was missing with Calipari, but Calipari definitely has more of a CEO mentality. Whereas I think Pope is definitely taking much more of a, politicking. Yeah. I'm like the mayor of the place, not the CEO of the place.
Well, and I take it another step too, because I think that when Calipari kind of went out and said, I'm not, look how many kids I'm getting into the league. Look what I'm doing for my kids.
Yeah.
I think that was a different conversation than what Pope is having, which is how am I building a winner?
Right.
And I think that helps the fan base figure out what's really going on end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Louisville, similar. I think they were not happy at all when they got their person.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes it's also just like how bad things were at Louisville, just like sets such a high bar expectation of like, of the escape of like, we really need a killer to get us out of here. Like, just an absolute whale of a coach to deliver us because we're in hell right now because just how bad things were with Kenny Payne. And so, you kind of understand sort of the reaction to that hire. I was actually going on the Louisville 24/7 page, and I was going like back to this time last year just to see like, what was the conversation. And that was one of those like left field hires because the night before he was announced, they were still going through all the list of different candidates that were not the actual hire. Like the only time I found his name coming up, like someone posted saying, oh, what about Pat Kelsey? Oh yeah, maybe. But, he's kind of down in like, option C. But we're looking at, options A and B right now. And so it kind of came out of nowhere. And I think just because the timing of how quickly, like it just like kind of whiplash, it's like, there was like no chance to say, okay, no, this guy's not going to be it. This guy's not going to be it. This guy's not going to be it. Like he just kind of whipped to the front. And I think that just shocked a lot of the fans about how the timing worked out.
Well, and then you kind of look on the flip side of this to show just how amazing this turnaround was. 2024 under Kenny Payne, 8-24, 185 in KenPom. This year, 27-7, 23rd in KenPom with an 8 seed.
Yeah.
And college basketball howling because they made the ACC final and gave Duke a good 30 minutes.
Right.
Now you compare that to Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame, and this is why I think it's hard for us to be able to qualify some things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll tell you that it shocks me to no end how quickly, or just how the season kind of looked more like Crean early stages.
Yeah.
You give him a season 3 with more of that talent that's coming in. Notre Dame will be interesting to see what happens with that.
Right.
Because I do think there's still a turnaround possibility. I mean, if Dennis Gates can do it, Micah Shrewsbury definitely can too.
Yeah.
But if I'm betting, again, the equity in my house, if I'm betting the title of my car, if I'm betting, my dog, which I would never bet my dog.
Yeah.
But if I bet my dog on this, it's like I would have taken Shrewsbury will have a better season than Pat Kelsey. I would have just taken that straight up.
Yeah. Now, would you have said that knowing what Kelsey got out of the portal?
Yes, even with that.
Really?
Even with that, because to me, I still thought Shrews had enough talent wise. And even early in the season, the first 10 or so games, watching them, how they played Houston, how they played against upper level competition, it's just something kind of got schemed out, fell apart. You had some injuries that kicked in.
Yeah.
They just kind of rode that, and losing begets losing sometimes, and you just kind of run into a situation where he just couldn't find his way out of it.
Do you think do you think that his system is very, very, I won't say overly player dependent, but like specific player dependent? Like, I think what he did at Penn State was really great. I think Pickett was like a very interesting kind of point guard to have in terms of like kind of the way he played the game, just Barkleying guys down into the post and just kicking out, and having like Lundy and Funk, both like, amazing shooters, that's like awesome system to implement. But yeah, I kind of wonder, like you, like I'm thinking about like year 3. It's like, okay, well, he gets Harrelson in there. He's going to have some better players, hopefully. They're going to develop. He's got a few other high school kids coming in. Can he hit something in the portal that might help out a little bit more? I don't know, but it is interesting because I can see why maybe they're not doing as well, just given what I think worked at Penn State and maybe what's not yet happening at Notre Dame. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I would counter this. You're looking at what he did as a head coach at Penn State versus I'm looking at the entire system going back to Butler, to the Celtics, to Purdue, and putting that into his field of work.
Right.
I think he's a flexible coach.
Yeah, but yeah.
No, meaning that I think he could win. He's able to win more than one way. But there are some coaches, like we're talking about Calipari. I think he's fairly stubborn in some of his approaches to the game of basketball.
Yeah, at this stage, I'd say yes. Yeah.
And I think a lot of guys who are old system guys. I think he's more tactical, which is where I was going, where he's going to find those advantages with those players and be able to pull it. Not to say Pat Kelsey has a similar, because again, you knew he was going to come in and shoot a lot. You knew they were going to come in and shoot a lot, right?
Yeah.
You knew that was coming.
Yeah.
The question is, are they going to get guys that can hit it?
Right.
Hit it at such a level that can actually be effective.
Yeah. I think you're right. I totally agree. And I think, Davis and Burton, I think just carried too much of a load. I mean, you look at the metrics, they're basically, and it's like they're playing 2-on-5 in some games. So it's, but yeah, I agree that I don't write off Micah Shrewsbury quite yet. I think there's still like more question marks than definitive like pronunciations on his coaching capability at Notre Dame.
And I was going to talk about Pat Kelsey some more, but I'll put it this way. I think that I think what I liked about this conversation, we went into kind of the Shrewsbury conversation with that, because it just kind of shows just volatility is a huge question.
Right.
And I think, we looked at how bad the lower parts of some conferences were. And Notre Dame being a part, even though there were some hints of decent, of better, but when you compare it to like a Florida State, a Miami, those types of programs,
right?
You look at the Big East with some of the teams that were just, even Butler, where we expect Thad Matta to be having this many problems,
at
this stage after a couple seasons there. I think that there's that, and then there's also the fact that we look at the very top of college basketball, and the margin between 1 through 4, and then 4, the fourth team in Ken Palm. You have 5 teams with an adjusted margin of 30 plus.
Right.
That's huge. That's a huge. And the question is, does that play out in a single elimination tournament? How does that play out in a single elimination tournament? But there's clearly a top and a middle.
Yeah.
And a big middle that's really kind of hard to figure out who's who.
Yeah.
And a bottom that isn't just exclusively, teams that are, you have, I think you probably have some teams that were sitting in that 5th group or even that 4th group that were very surprised to be there at the end of the season. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and for obviously different reasons. I mean, that that Florida State team, you have to wonder, those kids were thinking not just about basketball, but I came to FSU with certain promises of financial compensation, and now those promises are not being kept. How much do I really want to put out for this team, given that I've basically been, let's say, the compensation was misrepresented to me by the higher-ups in Tallahassee.
Usually we don't see civil actions,
right?
With in college, usually it's criminal defense needed, not you're a civil plaintiff against not just the university, the coach.
Yeah, exactly. A long-standing, multi-decade, arguably the greatest coach in the history of the school has to step down because of it,
and a guy that was considered a player's coach,
right? Yeah,
I mean,
that could be a whole other pod we could do just about the financial constraints of programs A, B, and C versus X, Y, and Z.
At some point, if you're Leonard Hamilton, you just dip into your investment account and just pull out the money and give it to them.
You know how many stories are coming out now about personal checks covering NIL payments?
No, I haven't even.
Yeah, I've heard more than one, and I don't think the ones I've heard represent the entirety of the instances in which that is happening.
Really? Okay, and I we can kind of wrap on this because I think this is something I wasn't. You know what? Actually, I kind of was expecting this eventually. That if you're making, I mean, we're talking mid-7 figures, and you want to keep mid-7 figures.
Right.
And all you need is an extra $1 million to just round out your NIL. Why would you not just root that through and take it off your taxable income?
Yeah. I
mean, don't write a personal check. Root it through.
Yeah.
Your collective.
Yeah.
Would it, if a tax accountant here is listening, could you please jump in? If a tax lawyer is listening, jump in and say, "Is my plan stupid?" Yeah. I don't think it is. I mean, spend the money, save yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's getting complicated. I think there are just certain schools that they want to operate at, let's say, a certain level with their competitors and peers, but they might just not have the resources of their competitors and peers. And what do? Well, you just got to cover it somehow.
Take a pay cut. I mean, honestly, would you rather, and that's, I think that this is where, at the end of the day, this is all going to kind of come to a head, is that at some point, everyone thinks that the money is inexhaustible. It isn't.
Right.
It isn't. And that's, I think, where it goes back to why you have so much bad in some of these, in high major conferences.
Yeah.
I think that, again, we talked, and we'll kind of take it full circle, that you have the Big Ten, you have the SEC, and then you have a next group, and you have everybody else.
Yeah. And
it's where how you scheme your way through this is going to be very important in the coming years.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll move on. Last segment.
Do we want to take a quick break? Let's take a quick break.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. Yeah.
Okay.
So coming up next, we'll wrap up with Indiana's 2025 campaign. Next on X's and Joe's.
And welcome back to X's and Joe's. So our latest episode of As Assembly Turns, were we really surprised this happened? Because I thought there was about a 50-50 shot this team would not make the tournament.
Yeah. that
just because
I
it's
think
so hard.
what we both said, I think, was that this was maybe the widest degree of variability between the high end and the low end of almost any college basketball team this year, of like where it could end up. And I think we both kind of, because remember we did a pod and I went through the numbers and I said, well, if you're applying the typical improvement curves for kids, let's say at a certain level, going to their sophomore to junior or junior to senior years, that the capacity, the quote unquote capacity of this team was about a 5 seed if they hit their normal numbers or their normal like improvement rates.
Mhm.
But also at the same time, I know, and we talked about, in a separate pod where he said that, look, typically recoveries after like a big drop in year 3 going into year 4, they're very rare. Like you just don't get like, that big, bounce back that, people kind of hope for. So kind of both of those realities going on at the same time. It's like, okay, well, they really invested a lot of money in the portal. They brought in some pretty interesting pieces, but also at the same time, this just usually doesn't work out. So which one is going to matter more, in the final outcome?
That, and I think that was kind of the thing that when you kind of looked at where this thing moved, and you looked in particular at how IU, it started with, I think it was Rice, Carlisle, Mbako, Renew, and Balo.
Mm-hmm.
And then you saw, Trey Galloway goes back to the starting lineup after Carlisle's out for a few games for whatever.
Yeah.
And then you kind of, and all along you were hearing this sort of a bunch of people saying, why, the construction's still a problem because we're talking about a too big construct.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's a too big and a 4.
Yeah.
And you're still not really penetrating the ball. And I think, you could tell Miles Rice was frustrated all season with the lack of space he had with which to work.
Yeah.
I think Kanan Carlisle was like, what am I into here? I have talking about Indianapolis, narrow lines of speed that I have available to me as a driver.
Yeah.
When I think both of them were used to playing, whether it was at Stanford or at Washington State, with wide amounts of space with which to work and ability to kind of just make the reads and the space to be able to make things happen.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's like now we're going into the teeth of a defense and expected to perform.
Yeah. Well, that's why you saw like Rice having so many pull-up jumpers versus what he was doing at Washington State, which was like taking it to the hole much more often.
And the other thing is just it's like, and so we had, and then you still had, similar defensive issues. And we knew, things were better year over year. The metrics showed that. The record didn't show that, actually. The record is, I think, exactly the same.
Yeah.
But, you looked at, what happened at Atlantis early parts of the season, and it was pretty apparent that this was going to go the direction that it went. But I think that variance for us was kind of the big question. And, and really it's just, I don't think, it's hard for me to say this, but I think Mike Woodson figured some things out at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But there was still so much that was kind of flawed in that really just, there was a lot of flaw.
Yeah.
That just in the design, in the concepts.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as bad as Kenny Payne by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
We're talking
not even that galaxy of failure.
But I think at the end of the day, it was, Anthony Leal steps up in a big way. But we had a team that had this many top 75 recruits playing on it, and Anthony Leal was getting 35 minutes a game.
Yeah, exactly.
My question is, where's the disconnect? I mean, the expectation should be that all of your, that you have a roster of guys who are playing at a level that Anthony, who are doing the things Anthony Leal was doing to get on the court in the first place.
Yeah, well, it's like, you recruit. Like in football, you recruit, let's say, upper 4/5-star wide receivers, and you throw them into an offense that is basically the wishbone.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, it's great you have those guys, but you're not actually going to be using them in the way they're supposed to be used. There's, schematically, you can't force those guys to become what you expect them to become if you're using an offense that's just not going to, take advantage of what they have. And you're right, Bob. Talking previously about the projections, how did I come up with the numbers for saying that they were like a 5-seed capacity?
Mhm.
In those projections that I ran, I looked back comparing, okay, well, what should the players have been at based upon like a normal like improvement projection versus what actually ended up. And it's like, looking at those today. So the bigs were exactly about where they should have been. I said that, Balo was like 9.3 coming out of Arizona. I projected 8.5 because I thought maybe, it's on a slightly less,
Right.
upper tier team. He actually ended up at 9.0. So he was actually like 0.5 above my own projection. Renew, I had him at 8.7. Actually, no, I had him at 7.9. He ended up at 8.7. So he was like 0.8 above. So that's, again,
Okay.
really good. He was above, again, where I was expecting. Rice, he was at 3.6 at Washington State. Typically, in that range, especially like, Pac-12 Player of the Year,
Mhm.
about a 7 or 8 would be like the typical normal second year.
You'd at least expect him to hit Solomon Ball numbers, right?
Exactly. So again, I projected 7.7. He actually ended up at 1.8. So he was
So went
off
down.
by 5.9. So that is a massive gap.
He reverted to the mean. He reverted to the average college basketball player, is what you're telling me.
Yeah. From his freshman year, he literally halved his BPM from his freshman year at Washington State, like literally 3.6 down to 1.8. And same with Carlisle. I mean, Carlisle, I had him lower. He's like right around 0 his freshman year. I put him at 3.5. He ended up at negative 1.5. So he's 5 full BPM points below the projection. So that right there, like if you're expecting those two guys to become heavy contributors on your offense, and both of them are about 5 points off of where they're supposed to be, well, that's a massive gap. I mean, that is literally the difference between what you would see between, let's say, like a 5, 6, 7 seed versus a team on the bubble and possibly out of the bubble.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Carlisle, when we looked at draft boards preseason, was he the only one on the IU team that was at least getting any chatter at all?
Baco was getting some, but
okay,
but
the only non fifth year senior.
Okay. Yeah, he was, I mean, Carlisle has been on draft boards before. Yes, he is a kid that people have been tracking before. So it's not like he's a complete unknown unknown figure to the pros.
Mbaka and Goody, how'd they look? Roughly, do we?
I don't think. Let's see. Where do I have Goody?
Because let me. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot like that.
No, it's fine. I mean, I was looking at this stuff. Goody, he was actually right about. I thought he would be about a. I put him at like 4.6.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a little bit above that. So, he actually, turned it around and had a better year than expected. So again, like most of the guys, especially like the bigs and above, I mean, with Mbako had a little bit, he went down, but really the biggest chunk, if you're looking at the gap of where IU probably needed to be, let's say like an upper tier seed versus where they ended up, it was mostly at the guard position.
Which is what we go back to. Again, go full circle to our conversation earlier, where the next guy that comes in Indiana, you actually had some guys who could be upper level players. You look at Rice and Carlisle. Could you see them playing? Could you see them playing in an SEC team
I think they could be on a good, maybe not SEC. Certain maybe SEC teams, but yeah, I think both of them have the skill level to be good players.
I mean, both of them kind of look like they'd be central casting for Nate Oates in some respects.
Yeah, I could see it. I could not see them at Auburn, but yeah, I could see them at a place like
Alabama, Kentucky, definitely. I could see them at Kentucky.
Yeah.
I don't know about Mrs. Old Miss, but I could definitely maybe see them.
No, I mean, neither of those guys I think are be great like attack dog defenders. I think Rice actually did some decent defending this year, but I could not see Bruce Pearl using Miles Rice as his primary.
He's a finesse defender, basically. I think the best way to describe it, he's a finesse. He's a mosquito. He's not a moose, a bull in a china shop.
Right.
And that's, I think, where you kind of have that. So I think we look at the talent level at IU. We looked at schematic, all these factors. I think that there was a surprise in that they didn't. I thought that people saying they could win the conference was premature and was not accurate.
Right.
10-10 though is definitely not. I was surprised, not. What's the term? You're shocked, not surprised.
Right.
I'm surprised, not shocked that this happened.
Yeah.
Because I think that there were some indications early on that they were going to be in a better position, and I mean,
and then that Louisville game happened.
Well, it was the litmus test. I mean, we all kind of knew it was going to be the litmus test. It was like that was the day that you just kind of knew it's okay. This is the day we're waiting. Okay, it's. You had 6-7 months of just pumping.
Right.
All possible conversations. And it's almost like it's like a final exam. It's like election day. It was in November.
Mm-hmm.
And you just roll out of bed and say, okay, this is the day we're going to know, is all this real or is all this where are things truly standing? And they got in there, and it was just a bad game on every possible way. But it was also it wasn't a shot making game. That was another thing where Louisville really just didn't out scheme them at all. It was more or less they were built to beat IU the way they beat them.
Yeah.
And they continued to prove that throughout the season. And then the Gonzaga game happened, and it was a very similar type of situation. IU beats Providence, which is a team that, is, again, it's, I'd like to say about the Big East. It's 4 or 5 mansions and a shanty, and the rest is a shanty town.
I like that. Yeah.
Providence is in a shanty. It's like they might get to a mansion sometime, but they got to knock one of those guys out of it. So
yeah. Well, Louisville was the optics problem that we talked about. Is that those comparisons of you're a first year coach, first year roster versus fourth year coach, fourth year roster, and they look like the roles were switched. Louisville looked like the 4-year roster, 4-year coach, and IU looked like they just completely come out of the box. So it looked like they're truly like 2 boats passing each other in the night, and unfortunately IU was the Edmund Fitzgerald. So
I love that reference, man. Oh, geez.
We'll put that song. Yeah, we'll put that song in the show notes.
Please don't. Oh, gee. That's what I'll give you on the 70s conversation, man. That's what I'll give you. That the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald should have gone down with the Edmund Fitzgerald, with Gordon Lightfoot. Ugh, I can't do Gordon Lightfoot. There's a lot of things I could do. Gordon Lightfoot's guitar should have been sent to the bottom of Lake Superior.
Yeah.
So on that happy note, let's talk about really good music. We want to thank our good, our Bob Thompson for the music and the sound of the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logo and the look of the show.
Yeah, looking forward. Episode 28, Mike Woodson, parting with a legend, a cautionary tale. Our guest will be Josh Burton from the Everything College Basketball podcast. And a little bit more about Josh than I do, Bob.
A little bit more. I bet.
Background.
Yeah, a little bit of background. He does his stuff just about 10 miles up the road in Edinburgh. And he's created a community that's dedicated to really focusing on college basketball in the very widest varies. I mean, you talk about a guy that really knows the game, not just talking about power conferences or specifically a conference, but really can dig in and some of those high major, low major type of teams and understand kind of what they're bringing to the table. Josh also is a UK guy. I mean, at least he's a fan of them. So we thought having him on to get more of a national perspective, but also an outside blue blood perspective to the conversation would be kind of important to us, just to kind of help us put it in perspective a little bit, because I think at this point, the Woodson leaving, or the end of the Woodson era, and you're really even getting in. Oh, God willing, this is the last time I have to go through the relitigating of the past.
Yeah.
But there's really a conversation that we've been wanting to have as to, okay, when you start looking at how we got from really the end of Tom Crean to where we are right now, and where this program is. And it's possible that sometime before we cut episode 28, which would be in a couple weeks, we might get some news. I'm not exactly holding my breath that we're going to get it anytime before. I think the earliest we're going to hear it will be next Monday, will be the earliest possible.
Right. You never know, but yeah, that would not be a bad guess.
So that would, but just to really kind of, so we probably do a 0.5 episode that we'll come out with pretty quick, just to kind of just quickly go over. Maybe we'll wait 48 hours.
Yeah, we'll do it right away. But yeah, we'll do within 2 days we'll do this is who it is, and
a 0.5, and this is what we see so far. Yeah. But I think having Josh on is going to kind of help us put this in perspective, help you guys listening to put it into perspective too. That it's at this point we're definitely in the middle of it's a market feeding frenzy right now, and so everybody's looking at what's up, what's down. We're checking the Dow, we're checking the S&P every 5 minutes to make sure to see if we need to sell apples or not in the front, or if we're back in the money and we're going to be buying Boardwalk. So at this moment, it's going to be we think it's more or less a thing of, let's look at how this is looking outside of just our usual fan base of IU and our community.
Yep. We'll look for that one in about the end of about the month. Yeah, and around the 30th or so. So. All right. But until then, this Endless Conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, the Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and backhomenetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
And I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody. And listen to Cranberries music today.
Oh, I'm bringing bagpipes out, man. That's it. I'm bringing out Irish pipes, man.
Bob, is there any Irish blood in the Moats family tree?
No, there isn't. Not that we know of. But I know my wife is about. I think she's a quarter Irish, which means Bennett's an eighth Irish.
Okay.
How about the Wiemuths? I mean, I'm assuming.
Not really. Yeah, if you go by my 23andMe DNA results, if they are accurate, then I should probably be decked out in bright Protestant orange today. I
think you and I both are wearing that bright Protestant orange. I'll send you a Columbus East sweatshirt. How's that sound?
Exactly.
Well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Yep, exactly. Take care.